He looked her dead in the eyes across that ballroom, then turned away and kissed another woman. Not a flicker of shame. Not a flinch. Just a slow, deliberate choice made in front of 200 people who all knew Elena's name. But that wasn't even the worst of it. The worst was what that woman was wearing on her left hand. Elena's grandmother's emerald ring. The one her grandmother had pressed into her palm the week before she died. The one Adrian had slipped off Elena's finger 3 months ago, claiming it needed professional cleaning. He had cleaned it all right. Cleaned it and placed it on someone else. If someone did this to you, right now, tonight, in front of everyone you knew, what would you do? If this story makes your blood run hot, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, this is only the beginning. The night had started the way those nights always did, with Elena spending 40 minutes in front of the mirror trying to decide if she looked like herself or just a careful version of herself dressed up for other people. She'd chosen the navy dress, not the red one Adrian had picked out, which cinched too tight at the waist and made her feel like a display piece. The navy one was hers. She'd bought it 2 years ago on a solo trip to Savannah when Adrian had canceled at the last minute. Some client emergency, he'd said, though she'd stopped asking for details around that time. Adrian had barely looked at her when she came downstairs. "We're late," he said, checking his watch. "I'm ready," she said, and that was the entire conversation. In the car, he drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on his phone, which lit up twice with notifications he tilted slightly away from her. Elena watched the city blur past the window and thought about a painting she'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. A large canvas, mostly blues and grays, that she couldn't quite resolve. She kept adding layers, and they kept canceling each other out. She hadn't told Adrian about it because he would have said something reasonable and useless like, maybe step away for a bit, as if the problem were simply exhaustion and not something harder to name. The Whitmore Gala was exactly what it always was. High ceilings, low music, people in expensive clothes talking about money while pretending to talk about art. Elena had attended 6 of them over the years. She knew the rhythms. She knew which conversations to enter and which to let pass. She took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and scanned the room for anyone she actually wanted to speak to. There was Margaret Holt from the Foundation, and across the room she spotted James Caldwell, whose gallery had shown interest in her work 2 years ago before she'd quietly shelved the idea to focus on Adrian's career pivot. She was about to make her way toward Margaret when Adrian touched her elbow. "I see someone I need to speak to," he said. "Business. Won't be long." "Of course," Elena said. She watched him walk away. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. She used to love that about him. Now it just looked like a performance she'd seen too many times. Elena spent the next 20 minutes talking to Margaret about the Foundation's literacy initiative. She was genuinely interested, had offered twice before to donate illustrations for their children's campaign, and Margaret was warm and substantive and asked real questions. It was the kind of conversation that reminded Elena why she used to enjoy these events, before they became something she simply survived. Then she turned to refill her water, and that's when she saw them. Not the embracing itself, not at first. What she saw first was the dress, a deep burgundy, backless, the kind of dress that announces itself. And then she saw Adrian's hand, flat against the small of that woman's back, and the way the woman tilted her head up toward him with the practiced ease of someone entirely comfortable in that position. Elena's brain processed it in pieces. His posture, his smile, a smile she hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. The woman's hand resting against his chest. And then the light caught it. Green. A deep, rich, unmistakable green. Elena went completely still. Her grandmother, Rosa Voss, had worn that ring every day for 51 years. Every single day, through raising 3 children and burying a husband and living alone in a small house in western Pennsylvania until the very end. She'd taken it off exactly once, when her hand swelled badly in her final winter, and she'd pressed it into Elena's palm with a grip that was still surprisingly strong. "This one's yours," she'd said, "not because I don't have others to give, because I want you to have the one that matters." Adrian had suggested having it professionally cleaned about 4 months ago. Said the setting looked loose, that he was worried about the stone. Elena had thanked him. She'd been touched, actually. It had seemed like a small, careful act of love from a man she was trying very hard to still believe in. She understood now what it had actually been. The woman turned slightly, laughing at something Adrian said, and the ring caught the light again. Elena counted her own heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Her body hadn't made a decision yet, but her mind was already somewhere else entirely. Somewhere very cold and very clear, like a room she'd been locked out of for years and had just now been handed the key to. She walked toward them. She didn't plan to. Her feet simply moved. The crowd thinned slightly as she crossed the floor, and at some point, she couldn't have said exactly when, Adrian looked up and saw her. He didn't flinch. That was the thing she would come back to weeks later, at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. She had expected something, guilt or panic, or the animal instinct to create distance between himself and the evidence. But Adrian just looked at her across that ballroom with an expression she could only describe as tired. Like a man who had been dreading a conversation for a long time and was faintly relieved it was finally happening. He didn't step away from the woman. He didn't move at all. He held Elena's gaze for 4 full seconds, she counted, and then slowly and deliberately he turned back to the woman in burgundy and lowered his head to say something close to her ear. The woman laughed again, soft and private. Elena stopped walking. Around her the gala continued, glasses clinking, music threading through conversations, someone behind her saying something about the quarterly returns being unexpectedly strong. The ordinary world kept moving. It had no idea. She became aware that her hand was trembling slightly. Just the right hand. Just the fingers. She pressed them against the side of her dress and stood there for a moment, deciding. She was not going to cry. Not here. She was not going to make a scene, not because she was afraid, but because falling apart in a room full of people who would discuss it over lunch tomorrow was not something she was willing to give Adrian. He did not get that from her. She set her glass down on a nearby table, carefully, without a sound, and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back. The air outside was cold for early April, the kind of cold that bites at the ears and makes the eyes water, which was convenient because it meant she could tell herself that's why her eyes were watering when the valet brought her car around. She tipped him, drove to the end of the block, pulled over, and sat with both hands on the wheel for a long time. She thought about her grandmother's hands. The knuckles, swollen in winter. The way she'd pressed that ring into Elena's palm like it was a complete sentence. She thought about how she had thanked Adrian for having it cleaned. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and allowed herself 30 seconds. Not of crying, something more controlled than that, something that lived just below it, a kind of pressure behind the sternum that didn't have a clean name. 30 seconds. Then she sat up, started the car, and drove home. The house was exactly the same as when she'd left it 2 hours ago. That was the thing about catastrophic evenings. The furniture didn't rearrange itself to acknowledge them. The throw pillow she'd straightened before leaving was still straight. The kitchen light she'd left on was still on. Elena set her keys on the counter and stood in the middle of her own kitchen and looked at the space around her. 7 years. They had been in this house for 5 of those 7 years, but the marriage had been accumulating for all of them. The compromises and the cancellations and the conversations she'd redirected away from conflict because the timing was never right. She had a very specific memory of standing in the kitchen of their old apartment, looking at a gallery brochure a friend had sent her, and deciding not to mention it to Adrian because he was stressed about a deal closing. She had put the brochure in a drawer, then she had forgotten about it. Or she had told herself she'd forgotten, which was not quite the same thing. She went upstairs, changed out of the navy dress, hung it carefully, and then went to the small room she used as a studio. The unfinished canvas was exactly where she'd left it. Blues and grays, layers that kept canceling each other out. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then she picked up a brush, not to paint, just to hold, and stood there until the thing behind her sternum finally settled into something she recognized as anger. Not the hot, immediate kind. The long, cold kind. The kind that doesn't burn itself out. She thought, I need to know everything. She set down the brush, went to the bedroom, and pulled Adrian's credit card statements from the filing cabinet. They shared a financial management system he'd set up 3 years ago, and she had access to all the accounts. She'd never looked closely before. She had trusted the system because she had trusted the man who built it. She spread the statements across the desk. It took her 40 minutes to understand what she was looking at. Hotel receipts, restaurants she'd never been to, a jewelry store charge, dated 2 months before he'd suggested having the ring cleaned, clothing items in a size that wasn't hers, a weekend charge at a resort town 3 hours away during a period when she distinctly remembered being told he was at a conference in Cincinnati. She sat very still with the papers spread around her and understood that the lies hadn't started recently. The lies had started a long time ago, and she had not been paying attention, and that wasn't weakness. She refused to call it weakness, but it was something she would have to reckon with. She also found, tucked behind a bank statement, a receipt from a jeweler. Not for a cleaning, for a resizing. Her grandmother's ring had been resized to a different finger size, a smaller one. Elena put the receipt down on the desk and looked at the wall in front of her. She thought about the woman's hand resting easy against Adrian's chest, the ring glinting under the chandelier light. Adrian's tired, undisguised expression when he'd looked across the ballroom and found her standing there. He hadn't been afraid of being caught. He'd been waiting for it to be over. She picked up her phone and typed a name into the search bar. Sophia Bennett, Family Law. She'd heard the name twice in the past year. Once from a colleague who'd gone through a rough divorce, once from an article in a local magazine about women in law. Sophia Bennett was described in both contexts with the same word. Relentless. Good, Elena thought. She looked at the papers spread across the desk and the unfinished canvas visible through the open studio door, and the empty space on the bed where Adrian would eventually come home and lie down as if nothing had happened. She started making a list. Everything she knew, everything she needed to find out, every piece of this that she was going to account for before she was done. Her handwriting was very steady. She noticed that. Her hand had stopped trembling somewhere between the ballroom and the drive home, and it hadn't trembled since. She was still writing when she heard Adrian's key in the front door 2.5 hours later. She heard him pause in the entryway, probably noticing her coat on the hook, her keys on the counter, registering that she was home, deciding what to do with that. He came upstairs. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at her sitting at the desk, surrounded by statements and receipts in her own careful handwriting. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. The silence lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. Finally, Adrian exhaled. Elena, don't, she said. Not loud, not dramatic, just the one word placed between them like something heavy. He didn't. He went to the other side of the bed and sat on the edge of it with his hands on his knees, and for a moment she almost felt something for him. Not forgiveness, not even pity, but a kind of exhausted recognition that this was a man she had once genuinely loved, and who had chosen, over and over again, to repay that with careful, sustained dishonesty. She turned back to her list. We'll talk tomorrow, she said. Elena. Tomorrow, Adrian. He didn't argue. That told her something too. She listened to him eventually lie down, and she kept writing, and somewhere around 2 a.m. she heard his breathing shift into sleep. She sat with that for a moment. The fact that he could sleep, that his body could simply do that. And then she turned back to the page. She still had questions to answer. She still had a list to finish. She worked until the room went from black to gray, and when the light was just strong enough to paint by, she went to the studio and stood in front of the canvas and understood finally what it had been missing. She picked up the brush. She started to work. The morning came in gray and cold, the kind of gray that sits on a city like a held breath. Elena had been awake for 22 hours by the time Adrian came downstairs. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee she'd stopped drinking 40 minutes ago, the papers still spread in front of her, now organized into 3 distinct piles. She'd labeled them in pencil at the top of each stack. What I know, what I can prove, what I still need. Adrian stopped in the kitchen doorway. He was already dressed, jacket, tie, the armor of a man who needed to feel prepared. He looked at the 3 piles, and then he looked at her. You were up all night, he said. Yes. He moved to the coffee maker. His back was to her. She watched his shoulders and thought about the years she'd spent learning to read him from behind. The set of his neck when he was irritated, the slight rightward lean when he was constructing a story. He was very still right now, too still. "I know this looks bad," he said to the coffee maker. "It doesn't look like anything," Elena said. "It is what it is. I'm not interested in how it looks." He turned around. He had the mug in both hands, and there was something in his face she hadn't expected. Not guilt, not defensiveness, but a kind of hollow resignation, like a man who had spent a long time carrying something very heavy and had finally just set it down in the middle of the road. "Her name is Claire," he said. Elena had not expected that, the directness of it. She kept her face still. "How long?" she said. It wasn't a question, it was a demand for an exact number. He looked at the table. 14 months. Something shifted in her chest. Not a collapse, more like a floor settling after a long winter. 14 months. She went backward through the last 14 months and started cataloging. The conference in Cincinnati. The weekend he'd said he needed to decompress with the guys from his firm. Her birthday in October, when he'd been distracted all evening and she'd told herself he was stressed about a deal. "The ring," she said. He looked up. "The ring, Adrian." He put the mug down. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. "You had it resized," she said. "I found the receipt. You didn't clean it. You resized it and gave it to her. The ring my grandmother put in my hands the week before she died." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Elena had ever heard in that kitchen. "I know," he said finally. "You know." She let that sit in the air for a moment. "That's what you have." "I don't have an excuse for it." "No, you don't." She stood up, picked up the what I can prove pile, and set it on the counter beside him. "I'm filing for divorce. I've already written down everything I found last night. On Monday I'm meeting with an attorney." He didn't argue. He looked at the pile, then back at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite regret, she thought. More like the recognition that a plan he'd been running quietly in the background had finally been overtaken by events. "I think that's probably right," he said, and that made her angry in a way the cheating hadn't. Or not in the same way. That calm acceptance. That prepared, managed response. It told her what she'd suspected going through those statements. He hadn't been caught off guard last night. He'd known this was coming. He'd been ready. "When were you going to tell me?" she said. "I was working toward it." "Working toward it?" She laughed, a short, flat sound, nothing like amusement. "What does that mean? You were alphabetizing your exit?" He didn't answer. "You moved money," she said. "I need you to understand that I know that. The Morgan account. The LLC you opened in March. I'm not an idiot, Adrian. I was just trusting you, and I need you to understand the difference because I think you've confused them." Something shifted in his expression then. The resignation tightened slightly around the eyes. "You went through everything," he said. "I went through everything," she confirmed. He picked up his mug again, looked into it like it contained something useful, put it back down. "Sophia Bennett," she said, watching his face. The name landed. She saw it. Small tightening of the muscle in his jaw. He knew the name. Of course he knew the name. He'd spent 14 months preparing. "Elena." "I'll be out of your way by 9, she said. "I'm taking the car." She went upstairs. She showered, she dressed, she packed a bag, not frantically, not with the chaotic energy of someone who hadn't slept, but with the systematic calm of a woman who had spent the night deciding what she needed. She took her laptop, her external drive with her design files, 3 changes of clothes, her grandmother's photograph from the nightstand, and her medication. She did not take the wedding photo from the shelf. She was in the car by 8:47. Sophia Bennett's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, and it looked exactly like what it was. A room designed to make opposing attorneys feel they were operating at a disadvantage. Clean lines, no clutter, 2 plants that were inexplicably thriving, and a view of the city that made everything below look manageable. Sophia herself was 51, compact, with silver-streaked hair she wore pulled back tightly, and a way of listening that made you feel every word was being cataloged and assessed in real time. She had been recommended to Elena twice in the past year. Elena had chosen not to make note of it at the time. She made note of it now. Sophia spent 12 minutes reading through the papers Elena had brought. She didn't make small noises or shift expressions. She simply read. Then she set the papers down and looked up. He's been moving assets for at least 8 months, she said. That's my read from what you've got here. Can we prove it? We can start pulling threads. He made some mistakes. The LLC is the obvious one. The timing on the Morgan transfer is sloppy. She tapped one of the statements. He's not stupid, but he didn't use a professional to do this, which means he was in a hurry or he was overconfident. Either way, it's workable. Elena nodded. Sophia leaned back slightly. I want to ask you one thing, and I want an honest answer. All right. How much of the last 7 years did you pull back from professionally to support his career? The question sat between them. Elena looked at the surface of the desk. I had a gallery interested in my work about 3 years ago, she said. I didn't pursue it. I told myself it was timing. His firm was going through a transition and he needed support at home, more events, more presence. I thought it was temporary. Did he ask you to pull back? Not directly. Did he encourage you to pursue the gallery? Pause. No, Elena said. Sophia wrote something down. That's relevant. We're going to build a picture of professional sacrifice. The contribution to the marriage that doesn't show up on a bank statement. That matters in equitable distribution. She looked up. I need you to be prepared for this to be ugly. He has resources and he's had time to arrange things. This won't be fast. I'm not in a hurry, Elena said. I want it done right. Sophia looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite admiration, but was close to its professional equivalent. Then let's get to work, she said. Ma Tom. She stayed with her friend Margot for the first 2 weeks. Margot was a landscape architect with a guest room full of plant samples and a large, opinionated cat who slept on Elena's feet and refused to move. Elena did not mind the cat. She minded very little about Margot's apartment. It was warm and it smelled like coffee, and nobody in it had looked at her across a ballroom and chosen someone else. She went back to the house once, when she knew Adrian would be at work, to collect more of her things. She moved through the rooms quickly, purposefully, not allowing herself to look at things too long. She packed her studio supplies, her grandmother's letters kept in a shoebox on the closet shelf, the painting she'd finished the night of the gala. She'd completed it in the early morning hours, working until the light changed, and it was the first piece in 2 years she thought was genuinely good. She carried it out to the car and stood for a moment with it in her hands. The house looked the same from the outside. Someone walking past would have no idea anything had changed. She put the painting in the back seat and drove away. The confrontation she'd been half expecting came 10 days later on a Thursday evening when Adrian called her cell instead of going through the attorneys. Sophia had told her, "Don't engage, let it go to voicemail. If he says anything relevant, forward it to me." She answered anyway. "I need to talk to you," he said. He sounded tired, not remorseful, she'd given up looking for that, but genuinely worn down by something. "Adrian, we're supposed to—" "Not about the legal stuff. 5 minutes, please." She almost said no. She had the word ready, but something in the quality of his exhaustion made her hold on. 5 minutes, she said. Go. He exhaled. Claire is... There are some complications. On her side. She was expecting things to move faster, and I'm trying to explain to her that legal processes take time, and she doesn't... He stopped. I just need you to know that the house... I don't want to fight you over it. I know what it looks like with the asset stuff, and I'm not trying to leave you with nothing. I want you to know that. Elena pressed her fingers against her eyes. Adrian, she said carefully, you moved money out of our joint accounts while telling me everything was fine. You gave my grandmother's ring to another woman. I have receipts showing you paid for 2 hotel stays the week of my father's illness, when you told me you were handling a client emergency from home. She let that sit. I'm not interested in what you want me to know. I'm interested in what the court determines is fair. That's it. A long silence. I made a lot of mistakes, he said. Yes. I know saying that doesn't help. It doesn't. Another pause, then quietly. Is there anything I can do? The question hit her in a strange place, not because it moved her, It didn't, but because of how small it was. 7 years, and that was the question. Is there anything I can do? As if the answer might be a simple errand he could run. Get me the ring back, she said. She hung up before he could respond. She sat with the phone in her lap and her hands were not steady this time. She allowed that. Nobody was watching. Go. The Mercer family dinner was something Elena would have avoided entirely if not for the fact that it had been planned 3 months earlier, and her mother-in-law, Patricia, had called personally to say she hoped Elena would still come. Patricia Mercer was 72 and had never in Elena's experience done anything without deliberate intention. She was also one of the only people in Adrian's family who had, once, told Elena quietly that she thought Elena deserved better than she was getting. She'd said it at Christmas 2 years ago, too softly for anyone else to hear, over the sink while they were doing dishes. Elena had deflected it. She regretted that now. She went to the dinner. It was held at the Mercer family home, a large colonial that Patricia kept in a state of aggressive tidiness. There were 11 people, including Elena, and the atmosphere was the specific awkward temperature of a family that had been told something significant was happening but had not been given details. Adrian was not there. He had declined, through Patricia, citing a prior engagement. Elena suspected the prior engagement was named Claire and involved a boutique hotel, but she kept that to herself and sat next to Patricia and talked about Patricia's garden renovation, which was genuinely interesting. She was 20 minutes into a conversation about Japanese maples with Patricia when the man came in from the back hallway. She noticed him first because he was quiet. Not in a nervous way. In the way of someone who has learned that most rooms give themselves to him if he simply waits. He was in his mid-50s, perhaps, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a way of moving through Patricia's crowded living room that didn't disturb anything. "Dante," Patricia said, and her voice changed in a way Elena had not heard before. Something between warmth and a very old caution. The man, Dante, crossed to Patricia and kissed her cheek and said something in Italian that made Patricia exhale slowly, a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Then he straightened and looked across the room with dark, calm eyes that didn't rush anywhere. Patricia said, "Elena, this is Dante Moretti, Adrian's uncle from my side. He's been overseas, he doesn't visit as often as I'd like." She said the last sentence with a specific inflection that landed somewhere between affection and reproach. Dante's gaze found Elena. He had the kind of face that revealed very little because it had learned not to, but something in the set of it suggested he was not operating from indifference. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. His voice was low and carried no unnecessary weight. "I've heard your name." "From who?" she asked. "Patricia." A pause. "And others?" She wasn't sure what to do with "and others," so she let it go and shook his hand. His grip was brief, dry, completely controlled. They were placed across from each other at dinner. Elena spent the first course talking to the cousin on her left, a pleasant woman named Beth, who worked in hospital administration and had nothing to do with any of this. She was grateful for Beth. She was aware, without looking, of Dante's presence across the table. Not in an unsettling way, more like being aware of a window, the way you always know which direction the light is coming from. Halfway through the main course, there was a lull in the conversation, and Dante said without preamble, "Patricia tells me you're an illustrator." Elena turned to him. "Painter, mostly. Illustration pays better." The corner of his mouth moved. "You say that like they're incompatible." "Most people treat them that way." "Do you?" She considered that. "No. I think they're the same instinct, understanding what a space needs." He was quiet for a moment. "That's an unusual way to put it." "It's an accurate one." He looked at her with those unrushable eyes, and she had the odd and slightly uncomfortable sensation of being genuinely assessed. Not appraised, not categorized, but actually looked at, the way you look at something you want to understand. She picked up her fork. The conversation moved elsewhere, and she let it. But she noticed that twice during the rest of dinner, Dante Moretti spoke to her directly rather than addressing the general table. Both times, the questions were specific. Not personal, not invasive. Specific. The kind of questions that meant someone had been listening to what she said before they asked. She drove home. Margot's home. The guest room with the cat and the plant samples. and sat on the edge of the bed with her jacket still on and thought about two separate things: the papers Sophia was still working through, the threads she was still pulling, and the way Dante Moretti had said, "Patricia tells me you're an illustrator," with a particular flatness that suggested the sentence before it, the one that hadn't been spoken, was perhaps the one that mattered. She didn't know what to do with that, so she put it aside. There were more immediate things to manage. 3 weeks into the legal process, Sophia called her on a Tuesday morning with a voice that meant news. "Sit down," Sophia said. Elena was already sitting. She sat more deliberately. "We've been going through the LLC documentation," Sophia said, "and we found something that wasn't in what you gave me." A pause. "He didn't just shelter assets. He transferred part of the equity in his firm's building, a property that was purchased in part with funds from a joint account in year 2 of your marriage, into an entity that doesn't include your name. The transfer was done 14 months ago." 14 months, the same number he'd given her at the kitchen table, mug in hand, looking like a man who'd put down something heavy. "He started this at the same time he started with her," Elena said. "It looks that way." Elena looked at the wall of Margot's guest room. There was a poster of a plant classification chart that she'd been looking at for 3 weeks without really seeing it. She saw it now. "Can we go after it?" she said. "That's exactly what we're going to do." Sophia's voice had a quality Elena had come to recognize, the careful, contained energy of someone who had found something in the paperwork that they'd been hoping for. "But Elena, I have to be transparent with you. He's going to fight this one hard, because this one actually costs him." "Good," Elena said. "I mean it. It will get uncomfortable. He may try to contact you directly. He may try to go through mutual friends, through family, to put pressure on you to negotiate before this goes public. I won't negotiate. A beat. I'm going to need you to really mean that," Sophia said. "Not brave-face mean it. Actually mean it. Because the next time he calls you, he's going to come at it from a different angle. He's going to be reasonable and measured, and he may even produce something that looks like remorse, because he now understands what he stands to lose." Elena thought about the phone call. "Is there anything I can do?" "He already tried that," she said. "Then he'll try something else." She was right. Adrian showed up at Margot's building 2 days later, on a Thursday evening, standing in the small lobby with his hands in his coat pockets and an expression that had clearly been composed with care. Elena came down because the doorman called up, and she stood on the other side of the glass door for 1 full second before she pushed it open. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," he said. "No, you're not. I needed to. I'm trying to." He stopped. His jaw worked. "They found the building transfer." "I know. I want to talk about it before it becomes—" "It's already become," she said. "You should talk to your attorney." "Elena." Something broke open in his voice. Not tears. She didn't think Adrian was built for tears in a lobby, but something adjacent to it, something she recognized as the sound of a man confronting the specific arithmetic of his own choices. "I didn't think it would go this far. You moved 14 months of money and equity on the assumption that I wouldn't figure it out and wouldn't fight it," she said. "That's not a miscalculation. That's a decision." He had nothing for that. "Get the ring back," she said, for the second and last time. She went back inside. She did not watch him leave. Margot was in the kitchen when she came back upstairs, and she looked at Elena over the rim of her wine glass and didn't ask any questions, which was one of the things Elena valued most about her. "Wine?" Margot said. "Yes," Elena said. She sat at the kitchen counter and drank half a glass and held the glass with both hands and thought about the building transfer. 14 months ago. 14 months of a parallel reality running alongside the one she'd been living in, entirely constructed while she was standing in the same rooms, drinking coffee from the same kitchen, trusting the same man. She put the glass down and reached for her phone. She pulled up the directory from the Mercer dinner. Patricia had sent around a contact sheet, as she always did after family gatherings, a habit from a pre-digital era that she'd never abandoned. And she looked at the entry for Dante Moretti. Just a phone number, no email, no address listed. She didn't call it. She put her phone back on the counter. Margot said, from the other room. The cat's on your pillow again. He's always on my pillow, Elena said. He likes you better than me, and I've had him for 6 years. Animals know, Elena said. It wasn't until later, after the wine and after Margot had gone to bed, and after the cat had settled his full unreasonable weight against her legs, that she let herself think clearly about the building transfer, about what Sophia had said, about what it meant that Adrian had spent 14 months dismantling the financial infrastructure of their marriage with the careful efficiency of a man who had never, not once, intended to stay. He had not been waiting to end things. He had been waiting to end things on terms that cost him as little as possible. She lay in the dark with the cat breathing steadily against her legs and the city doing its faint, constant hum outside the window, and she thought, this is the point after which there is no question left. Not about whether to fight. She'd been fighting since she sat down at that desk with the statement spread around her. Not about whether to forgive. That word had stopped being relevant somewhere around the time she found the resizing receipt. The question that was gone now, the last remaining maybe, the last small space where some version of her had been sitting with her hands in her lap, hoping for something she couldn't even name, was whether Adrian Mercer had ever truly seen her at all. He hadn't. He had seen what she contributed, he had seen the version of her that made his life run more smoothly. And when something more interesting came along, he had begun removing her name from his future, deed by deed, account by account, one careful step at a time, while she stood 3 feet away thanking him for having her grandmother's ring cleaned. She pressed her face against the pillow. The cat adjusted without waking. Outside, the city went on being itself. And somewhere across town, in an office on the 14th floor, a relentless attorney named Sophia Bennett was still pulling threads. Sophia called on a Monday morning, 7 weeks into the process, and her voice had a different quality than usual. Not the controlled energy of someone who'd found something useful in the paperwork. Something tighter than that. Something that made Elena set down her coffee before Sophia had finished the second sentence. I need you in my office, Sophia said. Today. This afternoon, if you can manage it. What happened? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell Elena that whatever it was, Sophia had been sitting with it for at least a few hours before calling. His attorneys filed something this morning, Sophia said. I want to walk you through it in person. Elena was there by 2 o'clock. Sophia had the document spread across her desk the same way Elena had spread the statements across hers 7 weeks ago, and the visual symmetry of it was not lost on her. She sat down across from Sophia and looked at the papers and waited. Adrian's legal team filed a counterpetition this morning, Sophia said. They're contesting the characterization of your professional sacrifice as a marital contribution. That part we expected. She tapped a specific document near the center of the spread. What we didn't expect is this. Elena looked at it. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. The language was legal and dense, and she had to go through it twice before the shape of it became clear. He's claiming the house, she said. He's claiming the house was purchased primarily through a premarital inheritance he received from his father's estate, Sophia said. And he has documentation to support it. It's not entirely accurate. There were joint funds involved in the down payment, but his team has constructed a very specific paper trail. She paused. Elena, someone helped him build this. This isn't something he put together himself in the last few weeks. This was prepared. Elena looked up from the document. How long ago? Based on the filing dates and the supporting affidavits? Sophia's voice was careful, deliberate. At least 2 years. The room was very quiet. Elena set the document down. She looked at the surface of Sophia's desk. Then she looked at the 2 thriving plants on the windowsill and thought distantly about what it meant that someone had been building a legal architecture to remove her from her own home for 2 years, not 14 months. The length of the affair, the length of the asset transfers. 2 years. Which meant it had started before Claire. Which meant it had started when there was no other woman, no obvious exit. Just a man sitting across from his wife at dinner tables and in law offices and in their shared bed, quietly, patiently constructing the exit she didn't know he was already planning. He was going to do this regardless, she said. It wasn't a question. Sophia looked at her steadily. That's what the timeline suggests. Elena pressed the pad of her thumb against the edge of the document, hard enough to leave a mark in the paper. Tell me what we have. We have the joint account records showing your contribution to the down payment. We have your professional sacrifice argument, which is still viable. We have the LLC and the building transfer, which remain our strongest cards. Sophia laced her fingers together on the desk. But I want to be honest with you. He has a coherent counter-narrative now, and he has a team that clearly spent time building it. This is going to be a fight over every single asset, and it is going to be expensive, and it is going to take longer than we thought. How much longer? Potentially another year, possibly more if he pushes everything to litigation. Elena sat with that. A year. The word had a physical weight to it, the way some words do when they land in a space where you've been holding yourself very carefully together. Can we win? She said. I believe we can get you a fair settlement, Sophia said. I don't know if we can get you the house. Elena nodded once, slowly. She drove back to Margot's apartment in a silence so complete she didn't turn on the radio, didn't notice 2 red lights she ran on streets where no one was coming, didn't register the cold that had gotten into the car through a window she'd left cracked. She sat in Margot's parking structure for 11 minutes before she went inside. She told Margot that night. Not all of it. The legal specifics were becoming too layered for casual conversation, but enough. The 2-year timeline. The house. The fact that the man she'd been married to had apparently been planning his exit since before he'd started sleeping with someone else. Margot was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, So it wasn't about Claire? No, Elena said. Claire was just an opportunity. Or a convenience, or maybe he actually loves her. I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore. Elena looked at the kitchen counter. What matters is that I spent 2 years living with someone who had already decided he was leaving and didn't tell me. And I don't... She stopped. What? I don't know what to do with that, she said. Anger, I know what to do with. Betrayal, I know what to do with. But this is... She pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment. He was sitting across from me at dinner. He was there when my father had the surgery. He was there at my cousin's wedding, and the whole time he was... She stopped again. Margot reached across the counter and put her hand over Elena's. Elena looked at their hands. I'm going to be fine, she said. And she meant it. She genuinely meant it. It was not a performance. But she also understood in that moment that being fine was going to require something more from her than she'd originally calculated. That she had been treating this as a fight she could win on the strength of principle and evidence and Sophia Bennett's relentless competence. And those things were all still true and still real, but the terrain had shifted. The man she'd been fighting had started the war before she knew there was one. She needed to adjust. She called Dante Moretti the next morning. She hadn't planned to. She'd woken up at 5:30 and lain in the gray early light with the cat arranged across her legs. And she'd gone through her options the way she'd been doing for weeks. Sophia, the documents, the timeline, the house. And at some point she'd found herself thinking about the Mercer dinner. About the way Dante had said, Patricia tells me you're an illustrator with that specific flatness. About the things he hadn't said. She'd picked up her phone and found Patricia's contact sheet and dialed the number before she'd fully committed to the decision. It rang 4 times. She was composing what to say to voicemail when he answered. Mrs. Mercer, he said. Same low voice. No surprise in it. How did you know it was me? She said. I never gave you my number. A pause. Patricia's contact sheet. Right. She let that go. I'm not sure why I'm calling you, she said. It came out more honest than she'd intended. A longer pause. What happened? She told him. Not everything, but the shape of it. The counter-petition, the 2-year timeline, the house. She told it flatly, the way you describe the weather to someone who already knows it's raining, and he listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Sophia Bennett is handling it, he said. Yes. Then you have the right attorney. That's not really what I called to hear, she said. No. Another pause. What did you call to hear? She looked at the wall of Margot's guest room, the plant classification chart, the morning light starting to come in sideways. I don't know, she said. I think I wanted to talk to someone who doesn't know the version of me that was married to him. The silence on the other end had a particular quality. Not empty. Something thinking in it. All right, he said simply. They talked for 40 minutes. Not about the divorce, about other things. Her work, a piece she'd been trying to get back to, a book he'd been reading about Byzantine architecture, a restaurant in the neighborhood near Margot's place that he said made a specific pasta she should try. It was, objectively, the most ordinary conversation she'd had in months, and something about the ordinariness of it was so unexpected that she spent the rest of the morning sitting with a strange, uncertain feeling she couldn't categorize. She told herself it wasn't important. She told herself that twice. The call from Patricia came 4 days later. Elena almost didn't answer. She was in the middle of a commission, a set of illustrations for a children's publisher that she'd taken on 3 weeks ago because she needed both the income and the discipline of a deadline. And she was finally in a rhythm, finally feeling like herself at a drafting table again, and she didn't want to break it. She answered. Patricia said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it from me before you hear it another way. Elena set down her pen. Claire Voss is pregnant, Patricia said. The air in the room changed. Not dramatically, not the way it does in movies, where there's a sound drop and a close-up and a swelling score. More like the air pressure changing before a storm, something subtle that your body registers before your mind catches up. How far along? Elena said. Her own voice sounded remote to her, professional, the voice she used in client meetings. 4 months, Patricia said. 4 months. Elena did the math automatically, the way her brain had been trained to do math now, to apply timelines to everything and see what they revealed. 4 months ago, she had been living in her own home, sleeping in her own bed, thanking her husband for having her grandmother's ring professionally cleaned. Does this affect the legal proceedings? Patricia asked. Her voice was careful. She was asking because she genuinely wanted to know, but also, Elena understood, because she was trying to locate the shape of what she'd just done. I don't know, Elena said. I need to call Sophia. Elena, thank you for telling me, Patricia. She hung up. She sat at the drafting table with the half-finished illustration in front of her, and her hands very still in her lap, and thought about the word 4 months, the same way she'd thought about 14 months when Adrian had said it in the kitchen, locating it in time, placing it against every other thing she knew 4 months ago. While the asset transfer papers were being finalized, while the LLC was accumulating, while Adrian was attending her cousin's wedding, standing next to her in photographs, smiling for the camera with his hand at the small of her back. She stood up. She went to the bathroom, ran cold water over both wrists, and stood at the sink until the roaring in her ears quieted enough for her to think clearly. Then she called Sophia. I heard, Sophia said, which was the first surprise. How? Adrian's attorney mentioned it in a call this morning. I was going to call you this afternoon. A pause. I want you to know this doesn't fundamentally change our position. Does it change anything? It may change the judge's read of the timeline. It complicates the emotional narrative, but we're not running an emotional narrative. We're running a financial one. Sophia's voice was steady, brisk, the voice of someone who dealt in facts the way carpenters dealt in measurements. What it does is confirm what we already suspected. This relationship was concurrent with significant financial decisions he was making. That's actually useful to us. Elena pressed her free hand flat against the cold edge of the sink. He's going to marry her. Probably. And they're going to need the house. Silence. Sophia. It crossed my mind, Sophia said. But Elena, wanting something and being entitled to it are two different things, and that distinction is exactly what I'm here to enforce. Elena nodded into the phone, even though Sophia couldn't see it. She stood up straight. Keep pulling threads, she said. That's what I do, Sophia said. She went to the studio that night, the small rented space she'd taken 3 weeks ago, 10 minutes from Margot's, because the guest room had stopped being big enough for the kind of work she needed to do. The canvas she'd been avoiding was propped against the far wall, large, nearly 5 feet across, blues and grays and the things she'd added on the night of the gala, which had changed it without her fully understanding how. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then she picked up a brush. Not the one she usually started with, a larger one, a brush for broad gestures. And she began. She didn't think about what she was making. She stopped doing that now, stopped treating painting as a problem to solve, and instead let her hands respond to what was already there. The thing her hands knew that her mind was still catching up to. She worked for 3 hours without stopping. When she stepped back, what she saw surprised her. Not the blues and grays. Those were still there, still the foundation of it. But something had come forward from behind them. A shape. Not literal. She didn't paint literal things, but something that had always been present in the layers and was only now visible. She sat on the floor in front of it. She was covered in paint from the elbow down. Her lower back ached. The rented studio was cold because she hadn't turned the heat on high enough and hadn't noticed. She looked at what she'd made and thought, I've been in here the whole time. Not a comforting thought, not a reassuring one, just true. She saw Dante again 3 weeks later, by coincidence, or what presented itself as coincidence. She was at the coffee shop near the studio, a narrow, serious place that made good espresso and didn't play music, which was the only kind of coffee shop she trusted anymore. And she was looking at photographs of her recent work on her laptop when someone sat down across from her. She looked up. Dante had a newspaper folded under one arm and a coffee already in hand, which meant he'd been there before she registered him, which meant she'd been more absorbed than she'd thought. The pasta, he said. She looked at him. You tried it, he said. You're 2 blocks from Carini's. How do you know where my studio is? He looked at her steadily. Patricia mentioned it. She wasn't sure she believed that, and she wasn't sure she didn't. She let it go. I tried it, she said. It was good. It's always good. He looked at her laptop screen, at the photograph of the large canvas. He didn't ask permission to look, but he didn't make a production of it either. Just looked, the way he did everything, with an attention that didn't announce itself. This is recent, he said. 3 weeks ago. It's different from what I expected. He looked up. Based on what Patricia described, she said your work was delicate. It used to be. He nodded slowly, as though that meant something specific to him. Are you all right? He said. The question was so direct, so entirely without the social softening that people usually applied to it, the how are you holding up construction, the tilted head, the preemptive sympathy, that it caught her off balance. No, she said, and then because honesty seemed to be the only register that worked in his presence, but I'm better than I was. That's the right direction, he said. He stayed for 22 minutes. They talked about her work, about a gallery district in Milan he knew, about the difference between painting for yourself and painting for an audience. He didn't mention Adrian. He didn't ask about the divorce. He seemed to understand that those things existed and that she was handling them, and that the most useful thing he could offer was a conversation that existed entirely outside of them. When he left, he said, The studio. Is the light good? North-facing, she said. It's good. He nodded. Good light matters, he said. And then he was gone, moving through the narrow coffee shop with that unhurried ease. And she watched him go and then looked back at her laptop and the photograph of the large canvas. She sat with an uneasy feeling that was not unpleasant. She did not examine it closely. Not yet. The summons arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by courier to Margot's building because Sophia had given that address as Elena's current residence. Elena opened it at the kitchen counter while Margot made coffee, and she read it twice before the meaning resolved itself into something concrete. Adrian's legal team had filed for an emergency motion to compel a forensic accounting of Elena's illustration and design income going back to the beginning of the marriage. They were arguing that Elena had been underreporting revenue as part of an ongoing independent contracting structure, and that the actual income generated by her creative work was substantially higher than disclosed. She stared at the paper. Elena? Margot said. Elena set the paper down on the counter. She pressed both hands flat against the surface. She breathed once, slowly, through her nose. He's claiming I've been hiding money, she said. Margot put down the coffee pot. My money, Elena continued. He hid assets in an LLC for 14 months. He transferred equity out of a jointly funded property. He resized my grandmother's ring and put it on another woman's finger. She stopped. Her voice had gone very flat and very cold, the way water goes cold before it freezes. Not dramatic, just a change of state. And he is claiming I've been hiding money. Margot said nothing. She knew better. Elena picked up her phone and dialed Sophia. Sophia answered on the second ring. I saw it, she said. It's a pressure tactic, Sophia said. He doesn't have grounds for a forensic audit that would survive a motion to dismiss, but he can create delay and he can create cost, and that's what this is designed to do. He wants you to feel like this is becoming too expensive to continue. It's not becoming too expensive to continue, Elena said. I know, but Elena... A pause. Sophia choosing her words. This is going to escalate before it resolves. I want you prepared for that. He's not trying to win on the merits at this point. He's trying to grind you down. Elena looked at the summons on Margot's counter. At the tight formal language of it, the clean institutional typeface, the implication buried in every line that she was somehow the party acting in bad faith. He has been underestimating me for 7 years, she said. That's not going to change now, and I'm not going to help him stop. Sophia was quiet for a moment. File the response, Elena said. Whatever you need from me, I'll get it. I'll need documentation of every payment you received from the beginning of the marriage. Contracts, invoices, deposit records. I have everything. All of it? I kept every record, Elena said. Every single one. Because I was raised by a woman who told me that paperwork is the only kind of memory that holds up in court. She hadn't known she was going to say that until it came out. Her grandmother had said it once, offhand, while helping Elena file the first freelance tax return of her life. She hadn't thought about it in years. She thought about it now. Get it to me by end of week, Sophia said. You'll have it by Wednesday, Elena said. She hung up. She looked at Margot. Margot looked back at her. Coffee? Margot said. Please, Elena said. She sat down at the kitchen counter and pulled the summons toward her and read it a third time, slowly, line by line, the way she'd read the statements on the night this all began. Looking not at what it said, but at what it revealed about the man who'd authorized it, what he thought she was, what he thought she could be made to do. He thought she could be frightened into settling. He had been wrong about her for a long time, and he was wrong about her now, and she was going to spend whatever it took to make sure she had everything to Sophia by Tuesday afternoon. Not Wednesday, Tuesday. Because she had in fact kept every record, every invoice, every contract, every deposit confirmation going back to the first freelance payment she'd received 8 months into the marriage. A $200 illustration job for a small regional magazine that had folded 6 years ago. She had the canceled check. She had the contract. She had the email thread confirming delivery. She had all of it because her grandmother had told her to keep all of it, and because some part of her, the part that had watched her mother navigate a contentious estate without adequate documentation and lose 3 months and a significant sum proving what should have been obvious, had taken that instruction seriously and never stopped. Sophia called her Wednesday morning. This is comprehensive, Sophia said. Yes, I mean genuinely comprehensive. There are payments here I wouldn't have thought to ask for. I kept everything, Elena said. Every year, every client, every amount, organized by tax year and then by client within each year. A pause. Elena, his forensic accounting claim is going to collapse when I file this. There's nothing to find because there's nothing hidden. The numbers are clean and they're documented 6 ways. I know. He did this to scare you. I know that too. Are you scared? Elena looked at the studio wall. The large canvas, finished now, had been moved to make room for 3 new pieces she'd started in the last 2 weeks. Smaller, more urgent, the kind of work that comes out when something internal has been released. No, she said. I'm angry. There's a difference. Keep being angry, Sophia said. Anger is useful. Anger shows up on time. The forensic accounting motion was dismissed 6 days later. Elena found out by text from Sophia. Motion denied. His team took a hit today. More soon. She read it standing outside the coffee shop near the studio, in cold air that smelled like rain, and she stood there for a moment with the phone in her hand and the feeling of something giving way under pressure. Not collapsing, just shifting, the way a door shifts when the lock finally releases. She went inside and ordered an espresso and sat in the corner and let herself feel it for exactly the length of time it took to drink it. Then she went back to work. The first time Dante called her, she was on the floor of the studio at 11 at night with 3 canvases arranged around her, studying how they related to each other from a low angle, which was the only way to see whether the tonal relationships were working across all 3 simultaneously. Her phone buzzed on the floor beside her. She looked at the screen, picked it up. "It's late," she said. "It is," he said. "I heard about the motion." She sat up slowly. "Patricia?" "Patricia," he confirmed. "She worries about you." "Patricia worries about everyone. It's how she processes information." A sound from his end. Not quite a laugh, but the shape of one. "How are you?" "You always ask that directly," she said. "It saves time." She looked at the 3 canvases around her, the way they breathed together when you got low enough to see them from the right angle. "I'm good," she said. "Better than good. Something happened with the work this week, and I don't want to talk about it too much or I'll jinx it." "Then don't talk about it. Most people would push." "I'm not most people," he said. Flat, simple, not a boast. She pressed her back against the studio wall and stretched her legs out in front of her, paint on both hands, lower back tight from the floor. "Why did you really call?" A pause, longer than usual. "I wanted to hear your voice," he said. She didn't say anything for a moment. The studio was very quiet. Outside, distant traffic, the building settling around her. "Dante," she said carefully. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to hear your voice." She sat with that. "I need to get back to work," she said finally. "I know. Thank you for calling. Good night, Elena." She put the phone down on the floor beside her and looked at the 3 canvases and sat very still for a long moment. Then she picked up a brush. She worked until 2 in the morning. The mediation session was set for a Tuesday in March, 8 months after the night of the gala. Sophia had prepared her for 3 separate sessions leading up to it, not about what to say, which Sophia would handle, but about how to be in the room, how to sit, how to breathe, how to look at Adrian across a conference table and not give him anything he could use. "He's going to try to make eye contact," Sophia said. "He's going to look for the version of you that still feels something for him. Not because he has feelings. He may, I don't know, it's not my department, but because softness is useful to him right now." "I know," Elena said. "Don't give it to him." "I won't. And if his attorney says something that makes you want to respond directly, I write it down," Elena said. "Pass it to you. Wait." Sophia looked at her. "You've done this before." "No. But I know how to hold things." The morning of the mediation, Elena woke at 5. She lay in the dark for 20 minutes, fully awake, running through nothing specific, just present, aware of her own breathing, the weight of the covers, the sound of the city starting its day outside. She got up, made coffee, stood at Margot's kitchen window in the early gray light. She thought about the last 8 months, the progression of them, the way she'd moved from that first night at the desk, statements spread around her, hand trembling, through the attorney's office, the forensic motion, the pregnancy news, the midnight phone calls from the studio. She thought about the large canvas, finished, propped against the wall. She thought about the 3 new ones. She thought about what Margot had said to her 2 weeks ago, unprompted, over dinner. "You look different than when you got here." "Different how?" Elena had said. "Like you've got more room in you," Margot said. Like something that was taking up a lot of space got moved out. Elena had nodded and not said anything. But she'd thought about it since. She got dressed carefully, not performatively. She wasn't dressing for Adrian or for the mediator or for Sophia. She was dressing for herself the way she'd dressed every day since she'd left, with the deliberate intention of a woman who understood that how you present yourself to the day is a decision, and decisions have consequences. She wore the navy dress. The conference room was on the 12th floor of a building downtown, neutral territory, beige walls, and a long table and water pitchers at both ends. The mediator was a man in his 60s named Gerald Park, who had the exhausted patience of someone who had watched a great many marriages end across this specific table and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Adrian was already there when Elena and Sophia walked in. He looked smaller, was Elena's first thought, and she knew that wasn't literally true. He was the same height he'd always been, but something about his posture had compressed. He was sitting with both hands on the table and his attorney beside him, a man named Fielding, who had a reputation for aggressive maneuvering and had been behind the forensic accounting motion that had crashed and burned 6 days ago. Adrian looked up when she came in. Elena sat down, opened the folder Sophia had given her, and looked at the first page. She did not look at Adrian again. For the first 2 hours, it was procedural. Sophia and Fielding went through positions. The mediator clarified terms. Numbers were presented and contested. Elena listened. She wrote down 3 things, passed 2 of them to Sophia, kept 1 to herself. She drank water. She sat straight. Adrian, across the table, went through several distinct phases. First, the composed professional, controlled breathing, minimal expression, occasional short responses to Fielding's prompts. Then, as Sophia began methodically dismantling the premarital inheritance argument with the documentation Elena had spent 8 months accumulating, something shifted in him. His hands moved from flat on the table to loosely clasped, then to one hand gripping the other. "Mr. Mercer," the mediator said at one point, "your counsel has the floor." Adrian had apparently said something under his breath. Fielding put a brief hand on his arm. At the 3-hour mark, they broke. Elena and Sophia went to a smaller room down the hall. Sophia poured water. Elena sat with her hands in her lap and breathed. "He's rattled," Sophia said quietly. "The inheritance argument isn't holding. Park can see the documentation doesn't support it." "The house," Elena said. "I think we're going to get the house," Sophia said. "Not certainly, but the direction is right." Elena nodded. Her hands were very still. That surprised her a little. She'd expected her body to be running hotter by now, given everything, but she was just clear. That same cold clarity she'd found the night of the gala, standing in the parking lot with her forehead against the steering wheel. "He's going to try something in the second session," she said. Sophia looked at her. "He's going to try to speak directly to me," Elena said. "He's going to wait for an opportunity and go around Fielding and say something designed to land. I know how he operates." "If he does, I'll handle it," Elena said. "I just want you to know it's coming." Sophia studied her for a moment. "All right," she said. They went back in. 20 minutes into the second session, exactly as Elena had predicted, Adrian set down his pen and looked directly at her across the table. "Elena," he said. Fielding turned to him. "Adrian, 1 minute." He kept his eyes on her. "I need 1 minute." Gerald Park looked between them. Professional neutrality, barely containing something that might have been curiosity. Sophia was very still beside Elena. Elena looked at Adrian. He said, "I know I don't have any standing to ask you for anything. I know that." His voice was steady, but the steadiness was effortful. She could hear the effort in it, the way you hear someone bracing. "But I need you to know that what I'm about to say isn't strategy." "Adrian," Fielding said more quietly. "I'm not here to ambush you," Adrian said to Elena. "I'm here because I woke up 3 months ago in a hotel room, and I understood something that I had not understood before. About what I did. Not just what I did to you. Though I know what I did to you, but what I did to myself. The version of myself I destroyed." He stopped. His jaw was tight. "I know you're painting again. Patricia told me. I know the work is... She says it's unlike anything you've done before." Elena's hands were flat on the table. She didn't move them. "I spent 7 years watching you make yourself smaller," he said, "and I let you. I benefited from it. And I told myself, I don't know what I told myself, that you were fine, that you were choosing it." A breath. "You weren't fine. You were disappearing, and I was the reason, and I knew it, and I kept going anyway." The room was very quiet. "I want to give you the house," he said. "I'm authorizing Fielding right now. No more arguments about the inheritance. The house is yours. He looked at his attorney. Draft it. Fielding looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. Gerald Park cleared his throat carefully. Sophia did not move beside Elena, but Elena felt the quality of her stillness change, the stillness of someone absorbing something unexpected and calibrating fast. Elena looked at Adrian. She looked at his face, which was doing the thing she'd wondered months ago if it was capable of. Something that was not performance. Or if it was performance, it was the kind so well executed it had finally swallowed itself. She thought about the kitchen, the morning after, the mug in both hands. She thought about the lobby at Margot's building and his voice saying, "I didn't think it would go this far." She thought about her grandmother pressing a ring into her hand and saying, "This one's yours." "Why?" she said. He blinked. "The house," she said. "Why now? Why today?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I watched you walk into this room and you looked—" He stopped, started again. "You looked like the person I should have been building a life with, and I understood that I never did. I built a life around you, and those are different things." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Sophia. "Does this change anything structurally for us?" Sophia was already reviewing. "The house concession resolves the primary property dispute. We still need to finalize the LLC, the building equity transfer, and the alimony structure." "Then let's finish," Elena said. She looked back at Adrian once. Just once. Not with anger. The anger had done its work and left her clean on the other side of it. Not with forgiveness, not yet. That was a different day, a different conversation. Just acknowledgement. The specific look of one person recognizing another across an enormous distance. Then she turned back to the documents. They were there for another 4 hours. The final paperwork was signed on a Thursday afternoon in early April, almost exactly 1 year after the night of the gala. Elena signed her name 11 times. Each time, Sophia pointed to the line and Elena signed without hesitation, the same signature she'd been making her whole life, unchanged. When it was done, Sophia shook her hand. "It's over," she said. "It's over," Elena agreed. She walked out of the building into April air that smelled genuinely like spring. The real kind, the kind that sticks. And she stood on the sidewalk and took one long breath. Then she called Dante. He answered on the second ring. "It's done," she said. A pause. She could hear something in the background on his end. A quiet room, maybe. The sound of someone setting something down. "How do you feel?" he said. "Like myself," she said. "Like I haven't felt like myself in a very long time, and now I do." Another pause, different from his usual pauses. Something in it that was working toward a decision. "Elena," he said. "I know," she said before he could continue. "You don't know what I was going to say." "No," she admitted. "But I know there's something you've been not saying for a while." A long beat. "Can I take you to dinner?" he said. She looked at the street in front of her, taxis, pedestrians, the ordinary, extraordinary persistence of a city that didn't pause for anyone's paperwork being finalized. "Yes," she said. She heard him exhale, barely, just a trace of it, and understood that whatever Dante Moretti was to the world outside, in this moment he was simply a man who had been waiting for an answer. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she agreed. She hung up and walked toward the parking garage, and she was halfway there when her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. A voice she didn't recognize, male, low, with a specific quality of controlled authority. "Miss Voss, my name is Marcus Rial. I work with Mr. Moretti. He asked me to pass along a recommendation for Saturday. Carini's, 8 o'clock. They'll be expecting you." She stopped walking. "He made a reservation," she said. "Yes." Before I said yes, a pause. "Mr. Moretti is a thorough man." She stood on the sidewalk. Something cold moved through her. Not fear, not exactly. More like the specific sensation of a floor shifting underfoot. the recognition of depth where you'd assumed solid ground. She thought about the coffee shop, the way he'd already had his coffee when she noticed him, the way he'd known where her studio was before she'd told him, the way Patricia's contact sheet had his phone number but no address, the way certain conversations had ended just before they would have required him to disclose something he hadn't offered. She thought about what Patricia had said at that first dinner. He's been overseas. The specific way she'd said it, not wistfully, not proudly, but with the careful neutrality of someone describing something she had long ago made peace with, not fully understanding. "Who is he?" Elena said. The man named Marcus was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "He'll tell you himself," he said. "Saturday, 8 o'clock." The line went dead. Elena stood on the sidewalk in the April air with her phone in her hand and the divorce papers in the folder under her arm and the whole long year behind her, and she understood, with the cold clarity that had become her most reliable instrument, that the chapter she had just closed was not the end of the story. It was the end of the first part of it. Saturday was 4 days away. She started walking. She spent the 4 days before Saturday the way she'd learned to spend hard stretches of time, by working. The studio in the mornings, the house in the afternoons. She'd moved back into it the week before the final signing, not triumphantly, not with ceremony, just practically. Boxes carried in, things put back in drawers, the particular quiet of a space returning to a person it had been waiting for. She'd repainted the bedroom herself, not because the color was wrong, but because she needed the walls to be chosen by her hands, not by a version of herself that no longer existed. She did not repaint the studio room. She left it exactly as she'd found it, bare, north-facing, the light coming in the way she needed it to, and spent the first 3 mornings back just standing in it, relearning the quality of the silence. She painted in the afternoons. The work was different now, and she was still understanding how, less deliberate, less concerned with resolution. She'd been a painter who needed to know where a piece was going before she began. Somewhere in the last year that requirement had fallen away, and she didn't know yet whether it was loss or expansion, but the work coming out of it was the most honest work she'd ever made. She didn't call Dante during those 4 days. She didn't need to. The reservation had been made. Saturday existed. What she needed was to walk into it as herself, not the self that had been defined by Adrian's betrayal, not the self that was still raw from the legal process, but the self that was standing in the studio with paint on her hands and north-facing light. Saturday morning, she woke without an alarm at 6:45. She lay in the bed she'd chosen, in the room she'd repainted, and looked at the ceiling and thought about the man named Marcus Reale telling her that Dante Moretti was a thorough man. Thorough. She thought about everything the word implied, and about the things she still didn't know, and about the specific sensation of the floor shifting under her feet on that sidewalk in April. She got up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and thought, whatever he is, he has not lied to me. That was not nothing. After 14 months of sustained architectural lying from a man who'd shared her bed, the simple absence of dishonesty felt like something solid to stand on. She dressed for Saturday with the same deliberateness she'd dressed for the mediation, not for effect, but for herself. She chose a dress she'd bought 3 weeks ago, dark green, the color of something growing. She put her grandmother's photograph on the dresser before she left, facing the room. She didn't know why exactly. It just seemed right. Carini's was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise itself. No sign above the door, just an address and a small brass handle worn smooth from use. Inside it was warm and low lit, the tables spaced generously, the kind of spacing that said the room understood that some conversations required air around them. Dante was already there. Of course he was already there. He was at a corner table. Not the most visible table, not the table that announced itself, but the one that had the full room in view and a wall at its back. She noticed that without meaning to notice it, and then she noticed that she'd noticed it and filed it. He stood when she came in. He was in a dark jacket, no tie, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her, with that unhurried, specific attention that never announced itself. "You look well," he said. "You made a reservation before I said yes," she said, sitting down. He sat across from her. Something moved in his face. Not guilt, something quieter. I was optimistic, he said. You were certain. No. He looked at her steadily. I was hopeful. There's a difference. The waiter came. Dante ordered in Italian without looking at the menu, asked her what she preferred in terms of the pasta, relayed it. The waiter left. They were alone with 2 glasses of water and the low murmur of a room full of other people's evenings. Elena put her hands flat on the table. Tell me who you are, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone stalling, the quiet of someone deciding how to begin something that had a long middle. You know I'm Adrian's uncle, he said. Patricia's nephew by marriage. That part is true. What part isn't? The businessman who disappeared overseas. The corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The shape of one, resigned and clear-eyed. I didn't disappear, I built something. Over 23 years across 6 countries, I built an organization. A pause. The kind of organization that doesn't appear in corporate registries. Elena looked at him. How large, she said. Large enough that my name, in certain rooms, functions as a complete sentence. She let that sit. Criminal, she said. It wasn't a question. By legal definition, yes. He held her gaze without flinching. I've never pretended otherwise, to myself or to anyone I've trusted with the truth. What I've built operates outside the law. That is what it is. The waiter returned with bread, set it down, left. Neither of them touched it. Does Patricia know? Elena said. Patricia knows I am not what I say I am in public company. She doesn't know specifics. She has chosen, for 30 years, to love me without the specifics. A beat. She is a remarkable woman. Does Adrian know? Something shifted behind his eyes. Adrian has suspected for years. He's never asked directly. He has benefited in small ways from proximity to me, certain business relationships that became available, certain difficulties that resolved themselves. He understood enough to be useful and not enough to be dangerous. His voice was flat on this. Not contemptuous exactly, just accurately descriptive. Elena looked at the table, then back at him. The threats that went away, she said slowly. During the divorce, Sophia mentioned twice that certain pressure Adrian's team had been applying just stopped. Business contacts who'd been willing to provide affidavits in his favor who suddenly became unavailable. Dante said nothing. That was you, she said. I made some calls, he said. I want you to know exactly what that means, so there's nothing between us that you didn't choose with full information. I made calls to people who owe me things. I asked them not to involve themselves in your legal matter. No one was harmed, no laws were broken, or no additional ones. A pause. But I used what I am to protect you, and I would do it again. Elena was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city moved in its usual, indifferent way. Inside, the restaurant held its low warmth. A woman at a table across the room laughed at something, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded. Why? Elena said. You barely knew me. I knew enough. He turned his water glass slightly on the table. A small, precise movement. The night of Patricia's dinner, you were the only person in that room who spoke to me without calculation. Everyone else, they were pleasant, they were polite, but underneath it, there was always the arithmetic. What does this man know? What is he worth? What could he do for me? He looked at her directly. You asked me about Japanese maples. She almost laughed. She didn't. You asked me what I thought about whether the variety Patricia had chosen would survive the soil conditions on the south side of her garden, he said. And you actually wanted to know the answer. You weren't managing me. You were just talking. I was just talking, she confirmed. I haven't had just talking in a very long time, he said. The food came. They ate. The conversation moved, not away from what had been said, but around it, accommodating it. The way water moves around something solid. He asked about the new work. She described the 3 canvases, the way they related to each other from a low angle, the tonal relationship she was still working out. He listened the way he always listened, with the full weight of his attention. She asked about the organization, carefully, specifically, not from fear but from the need to understand what she was actually looking at. He answered her questions directly. No softening, no deflection, but also no performance of honesty. Just the plain facts of what his life had been built from. The decisions that had constructed it, the cost of those decisions in terms he didn't prettify. He had done things she would not excuse. He said so himself. He did not ask her to excuse them. "I'm not asking you to be comfortable with what I am," he said. "I'm asking you to know what I am. Those are different things." She looked at him across the table. "What are you asking me exactly?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "To let me be in your life," he said. "Whatever that looks like, on whatever terms you determine. I'm not asking for claims on you. I'm asking for the possibility of just talking." A pause. "And whatever comes from it, if anything does, to be decided by you." She sat with that. "You're a mafia boss," she said. "Yes." "And you're asking me to determine the terms." "Yes." She looked at her hands, then at his face, at the specific quality of steadiness in it. Not the steadiness of a man performing composure, but the steadiness of someone who has lived a very long time with the full weight of what he is and has stopped being surprised by it. "I need time," she said. "I know." "I'm not saying no." "I know that too," he said. And something in his voice when he said it, something carefully held, a restraint over something that had more volume than he was letting show, told her that her answer had mattered to him in a way he hadn't been certain it would. She picked up her fork. They finished dinner. Yipas. She called Margot that night from the car, parked outside the house with the engine off and the April darkness around her. "Well," Margot said. "He's complicated," Elena said. "How complicated?" "Significantly." A pause. "Do you like him?" Elena looked at the dashboard, at the house through the windshield lit from inside by the lamp she'd left on. "Yes," she said. "I like him more than I've liked anyone in a very long time, and I don't know what to do with that given what he is." "What is he?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "Honest," she said finally. "Whatever else he is, he's the most honest person I've been in a room with in years." Margot was quiet for a beat. "That's not nothing." "No," Elena said. "It's really not." She went inside. She stood in the kitchen she'd reclaimed and made tea. She didn't drink and sat at the table where she'd spread the statements 11 months ago. And she thought about what honest meant when it came from a man who ran a criminal organization across 6 countries, and whether it could be both things simultaneously, dishonest with the world and honest with her, and what she was supposed to do with a man who was. She sat there for a long time. Then she went to the studio. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the house. No return address. Her name and handwriting she didn't recognize, so precise, without flourish. She opened it at the kitchen table. Inside, in a small velvet box, was her grandmother's emerald ring. Elena sat very still. She opened the box fully. The ring was there. The deep green stone, the setting she'd known her whole life. It was clean. It had been cleaned properly this time, actually cleaned, the metal bright and the stone undimmed. There was a card beneath the box. A single line, the same precise handwriting. Some things should always be where they belong. No signature. She sat with the ring in her open palm for a long time. The stone caught the morning light from the kitchen window and threw a small green shadow across her wrist. She thought about how he'd gotten it. She decided, after a moment, that she didn't need to know exactly how, that some things could be understood in their outcome without requiring the full accounting of their method. This was a decision she made consciously, knowing what it meant, knowing it was the first of potentially many such decisions if she chose to keep him in her life. She put the ring on her right hand, where her grandmother had worn it. It fit. She pressed her thumb against the stone and sat in her reclaimed kitchen in the April light and understood, in a way that had no drama to it, just the clean weight of a thing finally settled, that the ring was not the thing her grandmother had given her. What her grandmother had given her was the kind of woman who could sit at a desk at 2 a.m. with statements spread around her and know, without being told, what to do next. The kind of woman who could sign her name 11 times without her hand shaking. The kind of woman who could walk into a dinner after a year of war and look like the person she had always been, just more so. The ring was just a ring, beautiful and old and hers, but it was not the inheritance. She called Dante. "I got the package," she said. "I thought you might," he said. "I'm not going to ask how." A pause. "That's probably wise." She looked at the ring on her right hand. "Thank you," she said. "That's all, just thank you." "You're welcome," he said, simply, the way he did everything. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking," she said, about what you asked at Karini's." She moved her thumb across the stone. "I want to know more. Not because I've decided anything. I genuinely haven't. There are parts of this I'm still working out, but I want to stop working them out alone." He was quiet. "Is that—" she started. "Yes," he said. "That's enough. That's more than enough." She exhaled, slow, something in her chest that had been arranged carefully for a long time, loosening by a fraction, not collapsing, just making a little more room. "Saturday?" she said. "Saturday," he said. "I'll make a reservation." "Don't make it before I confirm," she said. A pause. Then quietly, "I already made it." She pressed her hand flat against the kitchen table and looked at the green shadow the ring threw across the wood and felt, despite herself, the corner of her mouth move. "You're impossible," she said. "I've been told," he said. The exhibition opened on a Friday evening in May. 14 pieces, the largest showing of her career, in a gallery on the east side of the city that had reached out to her 6 weeks earlier through a contact she hadn't spoken to since the year before the marriage. The gallery director, a woman named Iris Chen, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had opinions about negative space that Elena respected deeply, had seen photographs of the recent work and sent an email that began with, "I've been doing this for 21 years and I need to show this work." Elena had said yes before she'd finished reading. The 14 pieces included the large canvas, the one that had started on the night of the gala, blues and grays, and the thing her hands had known before her mind did, and the 3 new ones from the studio, and 10 subsequent pieces spanning the last 6 months. Together they formed something she hadn't planned, a body of work with an internal logic she'd discovered rather than designed. Iris called it aftermath in the press materials. Elena had let her. It was accurate. The opening was crowded in a way that felt different from the galas she'd attended for years as Adrian's wife. Those rooms had filled with people building relationships. This room filled with people looking at something. She could feel the difference in the quality of attention, the way people stood in front of pieces, the way they leaned in, the specific silence of someone looking at a painting and finding something they hadn't expected. Sophia came. She stood in front of the large canvas for 4 minutes. Elena timed it, not intrusively, just aware, and then found Elena in the crowd and said, without preamble, "This is what you were doing when you were up all night." "Some of it," Elena said. "You were working through it," Sophia said. "I was working," Elena said. The through came later. Margot came with the landscape architect colleague she'd been seeing for 3 months and cried, silently, in front of one of the smaller pieces, and then was embarrassed about it and then wasn't, which was very Margot. Patricia Mercer came alone, in a coat Elena had seen her wear to 3 separate significant occasions over the years, which told her Patricia treated this as significant. She held Elena's hands when she greeted her, and didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at her. "You're different," Patricia said. "Yes," Elena said. "Good different." "I think so." Patricia patted her hands once and released them, and moved through the gallery with the quiet authority of a woman who had been looking at art for 7 decades and knew her own mind about it. Dante arrived at 8:15 after the initial rush, which she understood was deliberate. He would not have wanted to arrive with the crowd, to make the opening about his presence there. He came in quietly, the way he moved through every room, and she saw him from across the gallery and watched him stop in front of the large canvas. He stood there for a long time. She made her way to him gradually, talking to people along the route, not hurrying. By the time she reached him, he had moved to the second piece, one of the three from the trio she'd worked on that late night on the studio floor, and he was standing with his hands clasped behind his back and his full attention on it. She stood beside him. "The one in the middle," he said, without looking away from the piece. "The three together. This is the one that holds them." She looked at it. "Most people pick the left one." "The left one is the most beautiful," he said. "This one is the most true." She stood beside him and looked at the piece she'd painted at 2 a.m. with her back against the studio wall, and she thought about what true meant and whether you could paint something true before you understood what it was about. And she thought probably yes. Probably that was the only way certain things got made at all. She sold 4 pieces, Iris told her an hour later, flushed and efficient, moving through the gallery with a tablet. 6 inquiries on the large canvas. 2 galleries in other cities have emailed already. I'll send you the details Monday. Elena nodded. She heard it, and it was real to her, and it mattered. But it was not the part of the evening that lived in her chest. The part that lived there was simpler than that. The room full of people looking at her work, and the work being what she'd actually made, not what she'd made herself smaller to protect. Adrian had called what she did a hobby. Not cruelly. That was the thing she'd come to understand in the long quiet of the last months. He hadn't said it to diminish her. He'd said it because he genuinely hadn't seen it as more than that. And the reason he hadn't seen it was that she'd let him not see it, had arranged herself around his vision of her until the arrangement became the thing she presented. She had spent 7 years making herself manageable. The work on these walls was what happened when she stopped. The night wound down slowly. People filtered out in groups of 2 and 3, the noise level dropping in waves, the gallery returning to itself. Elena helped Iris straighten a few pieces that had been jostled during the peak crowd, walking the room in the near quiet with a glass of water and the particular tiredness of a good evening. Dante waited. She hadn't asked him to, but he did, and she found him near the door as the last guest left, looking at a smaller piece she'd placed near the exit. The first thing you saw when you entered, the last when you left, a deliberate choice. "What is this one?" he said. She stood beside him and looked at it. Small, maybe 18 inches square. Mostly a specific shade of gray she'd mixed herself, with a thin line of gold running through the middle, not painted carefully, but dragged, imprecise, the way light comes through a door that's almost but not quite shut. "The night I drove home from the gala," she said. "Not the event, not the ballroom. The parking lot afterward. What the inside of my own head looked like." He looked at it for a moment. "You made something out of the worst night of your life," he said. "I made several things out of it," she said. "That's what I do." He turned to look at her. This close in the quiet of the emptying gallery, his face had a different quality than it did in restaurants or at family dinners. Less contained, or contained in a different way, as if the architecture of public composure had softened slightly at the edges. "I have spent 23 years," he said slowly, "building something that required me to be a specific person in every room I walked into, to never be legible, to never be off guard." He looked at the small painting and then back at her. "You are the only thing in a very long time that has made me want to be legible." She looked at him. "That's not safe," she said, "for someone like you." "No," he agreed, "it's not." "And you want it anyway." He held her gaze. "I do." She looked at the thin gold line dragged through the gray on the canvas, the imprecision of it, the way it caught the gallery light and changed. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "Yes." "Your world is dangerous." "Yes. And I'm not going to become someone who disappears into another person's life. I did that once." "I know." His voice was even. "I'm not asking you to disappear into anything. I'm asking to be near the life you're building, whatever peripheral role that allows." She looked at him for a long moment. "Peripheral is not the right word," she said. Something shifted in his face, small and significant. "No," he said, "it isn't." She held out her right hand. The ring caught the gallery light, deep green, the same green it had been on her grandmother's finger for 51 years. He looked at it, then at her. "She wore it every day," Elena said. My grandmother, she took it off once, in her last winter, when her hand swelled. She put it back on as soon as she could. She lowered her hand. She told me the ring wasn't the point. The point was the woman wearing it. He was very still. I don't need anyone to protect me, she said. I proved that this year. You did, he said. But I could use someone to be honest with. Someone who doesn't need me to be smaller than I am. Someone who shows up having already made the reservation, even when that's infuriating. The corner of his mouth, the shape of a smile that didn't perform itself. I can do that, he said. All of it, she said, including the infuriating part. Especially that, he said. She picked up her coat from the chair by the door. He held it for her, a small, unperformed courtesy, and she let him, and they walked out together into the May night, which was warm enough that she didn't need the coat but carried it anyway. Behind them, the gallery held its 14 pieces in the dark, the large canvas with its blues and grays, the trio that held each other from the middle, the small painting near the door, gray and gold and imprecise and true. Outside, the city was itself. Taxis, voices, the smell of food from a restaurant down the block, the ordinary, ongoing life of a place that didn't pause for anyone's particular story. Elena walked beside Dante into it. She did not know, precisely, what came next. She knew the work waiting in the studio. She knew the inquiries from other cities that Iris would send Monday morning. She knew the ring on her right hand and what it actually meant, which had turned out to be something different than she'd understood when her grandmother placed it in her palm. Larger and less about the object and more about the woman who wore it and the women who had worn it before her and the particular quality of endurance that passed between them without being named. She knew that the man walking beside her was not simple and that his world was not safe, and that knowing both those things clearly was better than the alternative, which she had lived for 7 years and understood thoroughly. She knew that she was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely herself. That was enough to start from. The night was warm. The city was loud. She had paint under her fingernails from the morning, and her grandmother's ring on her hand and 14 pieces on a gallery wall that were the truest things she'd ever made. She kept walking.